Okay, the show's about to start. Hello, my wonderful people. Today we gather here to learn about George Washington Carver, a great scientist and a great citizen. Join me on this journey as we talk about his life experiences, achievements, and goals. Let's start. George Washington Carver was born in Missouri's Ozarks region during the Civil War. He lived on Moses's and Susan Carver's farm. Little is known about his father, though his mother was a young woman named Mary. He had a brother named Jim, and they were babies when about 6 criminals came looking for gold at the Carver's farm. They did not find it, though, and took George and his mother instead. A tracker was sent and brought back baby George, but could not find the mother. The tracker was given a reward. Never to see their mother again, Jim and George lived on, and finally, a long time after, slavery ended. But when George was growing up, he suffered from sicknesses and colds. He was a weak child, and walking and talking came late. When he finally spoke, he had a stammer, a squeaky voice. Jim could do a lot of work on the farm. He could plow, chop wood, and do other sweat and muscle work, though George could not. George was too sick and weak for that. But George could drop corn kettles into furrows, churn butter, and collect eggs from the chicken coop. George Washington Carver was very smart. He learned knitting and crocheting. He also learned how to make medicines from plants and nature around him. He made excellent work of a hand-me-down spelling book, but it also made him hurt that he couldn't go to the nearest school, which was only for white children. George loved the outdoors. He would listen to nature, and he believed in God. He was always doing things outside. He had a rock collection and a pen for frogs. He also had a secret garden. He didn't tell anybody about it because back then it was considered foolishness for a boy to waste time on flowers. But he proved that not true, as he made neighbors' plants burst and bloom. They called him the plant doctor. When he was around age 12, he left home with his blessings and Jim's good luck wishes to go to a black town named Nosha. He exchanged chores for room and board at Mariah Watkins' house. She told him, "You must learn all that's so starving for a little learning," she urged, no doubt, thinking mainly of survivors of slavery. She also told him to stop calling himself Carver's George, for he was no one's property. He had been named Carver's George, and that's what he had called himself too, though he is now known as George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver stayed around Kansas for 10 years. He did domestic work mostly. He added to his formal education in snatches. When he finally finished high school in 1885 in Minneapolis, Kansas, is where he adopted the middle name W. When somebody asked him if it stood for George Washington, his attitude was, "Why not?" So it was George Washington Carver. He decided to apply to Highland University in northeast Kansas. But when he got there, a Highland official told him that they did not accept black students. He wound up in Winchester, Iowa. He worked as a cook in a hotel and met a white couple who took shine to his mind. They encouraged him to apply to Simpson College in Indiana, Iowa, which did not have a no blacks policy. At the Iowa College, Carver excelled at everything. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree. But in Alabama, Booker T. Washington, principal of a school for blacks in Tuskegee, was determined to show him a different way. Washington's March 1896 letter to Carver began, "Tuskegee Institute seeks to provide education, a means for survival to those who attend. Our students are poor, often starving. They travel miles of torn roads across years of poverty. We teach them to read and write, but words cannot fill stomachs. They need to learn how to plant and harvest crops." Carver would have the challenge of bringing people from devastation, poverty, and waste to more fruitful lives. Washington wanted Carver to run and design the agricultural department, do research, and teach courses. Carver was thinking about considering another offer from the black school, Mechanical College in Mississippi. Either place, he'd be leaving his comfort zone. But Tuskegee had an advantage. Carver greatly admired Booker T. Washington. So, in early October 1896, he left. But from the folks in Iowa, they gave him a going-away gift, a microscope. At Tuskegee, Carver only had a microscope. He was disappointed, but not discouraged. He used jars, beakers, and much more that was lying around to test the soil and figure out why so many people were starving. Soon he had finally figured out why so many people were starving. Because they were not rotating their crops the correct way. They were using the same crops every year, so it was taking the exact same nutrients from the soil every single time they planted it. Their plants were not growing as big and strong, and not as many crops were growing. He found out that rotating the crops with peanuts could bring all the nutrients back into the soil. Farmers were happy, except that they didn't know what to do with all the peanuts lying around. So George Washington Carver went and thought up of 300 products to make from peanuts. For example, milk, Worcestershire sauce, salad oil, cooking oils, paper, soaps, and wood stains are just a few. The rest of his life was spent at the Tuskegee Institute working hard. But by the late 1930s, Carver was in poor health. Now that he was in his 70s, he did not teach. He used the rest of his strength to lay down the groundworks for his George Washington Carver Foundation. But by 1943, January 5th, he sadly died, though he probably would have disagreed with how we had said that. He would probably say he merely ascended into the arms of his great creator. And that was for today's show on George Washington Carver. All right, folks. Tune in next time for more shows like this. Bye!